What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with Tech Daily, and in this video, we're going to be doing a full comparison between the new Samsung Galaxy M31 and the Samsung Galaxy A51. Now, this has actually been the most requested comparison over the last few days, and for good reason. These phones are both super popular right now, and I know a lot of you guys are trying to decide which one you should go with as your next purchase. So hopefully I can help you with that in this video. I think the biggest reason these phones are so popular is that they both retail for well under $300, but they each offer a ton of great specs and features that make them a great buy. Still, each of these phones offer their own unique things that might make one more enticing to you over the other. And I'm going to try and go over everything you need to know in this video. To kick things off, let's dive a little deeper with the pricing and availability. The A51 is available right now for as low as about $279 from places like Amazon, already a bit cheaper than its launch price just a couple of months ago, and sitting comfortably under that $300 price point. The M31, which just came out, has a range in price of anywhere between $200 to $250 depending on where you're located. Still significantly under $300 as well, and also quite a bit cheaper than the A51. If price is your biggest consideration, you'll likely be saving $30 to $50 or more by going with the M31. Of course, there is a lot more to it than just the selling price. So let's take a look at what each of these phones has to offer. Now, physically, at least at first glance, these phones appear to be quite similar, but there are actually a number of things to talk about here. The M31 is a 6.4-inch device, while the A51 is a 6.5-inch phone. But the housing and body of these devices is super close. Their height and width are nearly identical, just a fraction of a millimeter off in either direction. The most noticeable difference is actually in the thickness. The M31 is a full millimeter thicker in the hand than the A51, and it's something you can feel. The M31 is almost 20 grams heavier than the A51, and that's probably the most noticeable thing. That thickness and weight difference mainly have to do with the massive battery crammed inside the M31, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But you'll also notice that while the materials here with each phone are technically the same, Samsung took different approaches with certain design elements. The M31 is basically a uniform, all-plastic build with no extras. The housing is one solid color, and it's molded to a simple rounded shape. The A51, on the other hand, gets a more premium look, which includes a polished plastic frame and slimmer, tapered sides that make the phone feel even slimmer in the hand. There's also that shimmering rainbow effect and light crisscross design pattern around back as well. And overall, I think the A51 does offer a more premium look over the M31, though I know this design choice isn't everyone's favorite. In the end though, these are both all plastic phones. So besides the look, you aren't getting anything better physically from either device. And if you want a higher quality metal and glass build, you'll have to look elsewhere. Taking a look around at everything else, you'll find the SIM and SD card tray in the same spot on each phone. The volume and power buttons placed pretty similarly as well on the right, and underneath, both phones have a USB-C charging port, single speaker, and they retain a headphone jack. Around the back, you'll see the camera setups, and I'll go more in depth with those in just a bit. But you'll also notice that the M31 packs a physical fingerprint sensor on the rear as well. The A51 does still have a fingerprint sensor too, but it's hidden underneath the display. Now, this is going to be more of a personal preference, I think. I like the physical rear-mounted fingerprint sensor personally. It's easier to find, and I think overall more consistent. Speed-wise, it feels a little quicker too, but we're talking like a fraction of a second here. And obviously, there are other ways to unlock the device like facial recognition, which as far as my testing goes, seems to be the same for both phones. It's a little tough doing a side-by-side comparison, but I didn't find an advantage with either device. Sometimes the A51 was a little quicker, and sometimes the M31 was a little quicker. I'd say the most important design aspect that's different across these phones is the front display. Like I mentioned earlier, the A51 with its 6.5-inch screen is jammed into basically the same sized body as the M31's 6.4-inch display. And Samsung was able to do this by shrinking the bezels quite a bit on the A series phone. Most notably, that bottom chin sort of disappears on the A51, while it's much more prominent on the M31. Across the top, you have the Infinity O cutout for the front camera rather than the larger and more prominent Infinity U teardrop setup on the M31. And I know for me personally, I like the refreshed look of the A51 overall, and I had hoped and was sort of expecting them to do this on the M31 as well, but unfortunately that didn't happen. The M31 just gets stuck with sort of last year's screen design. I think that's probably the most noticeable physical difference between these two phones. While you get just a tiny bit more screen real estate on the A51, the actual display technology with these two devices is identical. Both phones offer a beautiful Super AMOLED panel, the A51 coming in at 2400 by 1080 resolution, and the smaller M31 offers a bit fewer pixels at 2340 by 1080. But minor size difference aside, the color and clarity and detail here are exactly the same. With the size difference, you aren't necessarily getting anything more with the A51, but like I said earlier, with the viewing experience here, the things you'll most notice are the larger bezels and prominent chin on the M31. And the difference in front-facing camera too. If you can look past that though, like I said, you get the same actual viewing experience, even going with the less expensive M31. And either way you do go, I think you're getting some of the best displays with these phones at this under $300 price point. Coupled with the viewing experience, the listening experience with these phones is also the same. They both offer a single downward firing speaker, and I personally can't tell a difference. They get just as loud and sound the same to me, and while they aren't as good as stereo speakers, they're still a decent listening experience when you do need to hear your content out loud. Inside, these phones are both powered by really respectable sized batteries, but the M31 takes things to an entirely different level. This phone packs a massive 6,000 milliamp capacity battery inside its a little thicker body, while the A51's still decent 4,000 milliamp battery is significantly dwarfed. In real world conditions, that translates to about 2 days of use on a single charge with the M31. And while the A51 can still make it through a day, it just simply can't compete. The M31 and all of Samsung's M series phones for that matter are known for their over-the-top battery life. And it's probably the single biggest thing that sets these phones apart from the competition. If battery life is what you're after, like significantly longer battery life for that matter, beyond any other smartphone in the market, the M31 is the answer. And as far as their charging speeds, both phones ship with the same 15-watt wall adapter, so no super fast charging here with either device. But the thing to consider here is actually how often you might be charging. And with the A51, you'll certainly be plugged in more in comparison. When it comes to the internal specs and software experience, these phones are once again pretty similar. Both devices ship with Samsung's own Exynos 9611 chipset and Mali G72 GPU. The M31 offers 6 gigs of RAM standard with no other models right now, while the A51 packs either 4, 6, or 8 gigs of RAM, so you can sort of decide what makes sense for you. The M31, interestingly enough, also offers UFS 2.1, with the A51 sticking with UFS 2, but both phones offer Android 10 and One UI 2 out of the box. And side by side, performance-wise, I think these phones are super close. I don't personally feel like one phone has an advantage over the other in everyday tasks, which makes sense since they offer basically the same specs anyway. And even if you go with 4 gigs or 8 gigs of RAM on the A51 versus the M31's 6, I'm not confident that that difference yields a noticeable speed increase or decrease in either direction. They're both solid phones with the ability to handle just about everything, and I don't personally consider the internal specs to be a deciding factor. And just as a side note, in regards to NFC, some models and regions do offer NFC on the A51, while the M31, I believe, right now has no NFC support whatsoever. So if that's something important to you, I would lean towards the A51, but you'll need to look more closely at the model of the phone and the actual country you're getting it in before making that purchase. The last big difference between these two phones are the front and rear cameras. Now, each device received significant camera upgrades from their predecessors, but the mega monster M31 surprisingly might actually have more to offer. The main difference is in the primary lens. The M31 packs a crazy 64 megapixel f1.8 shooter, while the A51 has a still good but less extreme 48 megapixel f2.0 lens. And there is actually a slight difference in the ultra-wide lenses too, with the advantage going to the A51 with its 12 megapixel f2.2 shooter over the M31's 8 megapixel hardware. The other two lenses, the 5 megapixel macro and 5 megapixel depth sensing camera, appear to be exactly the same. And up front, there's also another slight difference. The M31 has a 32 megapixel f2.0 aperture lens, while the A51 has a 32 megapixel f2.2 lens. Now, I'm going to have a full dedicated camera comparison video between these two phones up on the channel very soon, within the next day or two if it's not up already. So you can see these pictures and videos side by side. But I will say that the differences here are noticeable, though it might come down to personal preference and the overall look of the picture. The M31, of course, can capture more detail with its better main lens, and the front-facing cameras tend to look pretty different too, and for different reasons. But check out my dedicated camera comparison video for a more in-depth look at real-world shooting conditions, because you might prefer the look of one phone over the other. A couple last things to note: neither phone is water resistant, so that's a bit of a shame, and neither phone offers wireless charging either, so keep that in mind if that's something that's important to you. So all in all, this is honestly a super tough comparison to make. Obviously, the M31 has the advantage when it comes to battery life, and has a little more potential with the main camera around back too, but the A51 has a refreshed design with a display and bezels and a more premium look as well. If it were my choice though, I think I like the M31, mainly because you're getting a bit more for less of a price, and the overall value is really hard to argue with. The final things to consider, of course, are whether these devices are available for you to buy in your country or region, and whether they'll work on your network. Unfortunately, the M31 just isn't as easily available and may not work on your network, especially if you're in the Western Hemisphere. But even if you wind up having to get the A51, I think it is still a great phone by itself. So there you go. That's everything you need to know about the M31 and the A51. What do you guys think? Which phone are you going with, the A51 or the M31? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to know your thoughts, of course, and feel free to let me know if I happen to miss anything important. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow Tech Daily on Twitter and subscribe to the Tech Daily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.